Good evening, everyone. Megan, I'm just checking. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can. Okay, cool. All right. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for tuning in to tonight's webinar. We're delighted to be able to offer this opportunity to our community to showcase and highlight the talents and interests of our students and alumni. The conversation between students in our Global Scholars Program and alumna Tara Hammonds embodies goals 2, 4, and 5. As our students explored their own interests, they were challenged intellectually to think about the issues of refugeeism and displacement. And as we come together tonight, we are able to highlight our shared commitment to each other as the Sacred Heart community and in the greater world as global citizens. So firstly, we are very, very grateful for the support of our head of school, Meg Frazier. We thank you, and as well as to Christine DeCapua and Carmen Hughes, the co-chairs for the from the Board of Trustees for the Living Our Mission Committee. Also a big thanks to my colleagues, Carrie Bader and Megan Ryan, the team that's helped to make this happen. And lastly, yet most importantly, perhaps, let me say from everyone here, as well as our global scholars, a huge thank you to Tara Hammonds, who took the time to engage with all of us on her very, very important work all the way from Gaza. So before we get started, I just wanted to orient you all a little bit about our Global Scholars Program. Here you'll see our 14 seniors who are the cohort of the class of 2022. By way of background, my name is Judy Cinto. I'm part of the faculty here in the upper school. I teach world language and I'm the director of the Global Scholars Program. But briefly, the GSP is a cross-curricular academic certificate program. It's open to seniors with a keen interest in language and global studies to deepen their exploration in these areas. And again, we have 14 seniors. It's a distinction for them. And in terms of our mission, we're very much mission focused, and we fall under the aegis of the Living Our Mission Committee. So we aim to equip our students with world language communication skills and cross-cultural academic experiences so that they may thrive as responsible global leaders in a diverse and complex world. And our program has 3 pillars of study that are specific. Firstly, all our candidates must be strong and proficient world language students because our program is rooted in the idea that communication is the core to all interculturality. Secondly, students have cross-curricular academic requirements. The core one being that they have to write an integrated senior seminar paper with a global strand. And then tonight's focus really is on global citizenship. And that's the aspect of the program that's quite entrepreneurial. We're very proud of, where our students are asked to do, create, and share in cross-cultural experiences. And just to clarify what I mean by that, global citizenship, by our definition, is an aspirational goal, one which our students and people in general are opting into this notion of being a global citizen. So much like faith, as a faith-based school, being a global citizen is a choice that we make. So in contrast to legal citizenship, which is sovereignty, when we think about where we're born into or where we live or where we pay taxes, global citizens are choosing to do more. Where there's a goal and a responsibility to have a series of attitudes and actions where we are interconnected and educated, curious, courageous, and impactful. And I'm sure you're going to see, of course, our program is mission driven, but this conversation that we have with Tara Hammonds, who truly was a global scholar before we had the program, will really bear that out. So now what I'd like to do is turn it over to 2 of our global scholars who are here tonight, Megan Maloney and Jess Thompson, and they're gonna kick us off. So take it away, Megan.
Hi everyone. So to start this off, I'm going to lead us in prayer, and I ask that you all join me. So in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And this is a prayer for migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. God, no one is a stranger to you, and no one is ever far from your loving care. In your kindness, watch over migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, those separated from their loved ones, those who are lost, and those separated from their loved ones, and those who have been exiled from their homes. Bring them safely to the place where they long to be, and help us always show your kindness to strangers and those in need. We ask this through Christ our Lord, who too was a refugee and migrant, who traveled to another land searching for a home. Amen. Father, Son, Spirit. Okay, so to start, good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Maloney, and I'm a senior in the Global Scholars Program. And so Jess and we began our work with the Global Scholars cohort actually over the summer, where we all engaged in research about global refugeeism, and we had a discussion once the school year started. And so like I said, our research centered around global refugeeism and the causes and effects of displacement. And actually, once we started the year, we were able to think about our research concurrently with our senior seminar course summer reading, which was Clementine Womaria's The Girl Who Smiled Beads. So it was really interesting to have our global scholars research along with the reading that we had done that all of the seniors did this year, but all of us in the global scholars, we were able to have a much more enriched understanding with the research we had done. And so actually our global scholars cohort work was quite timely because we were doing this at the same time or around the same time as the crisis in Afghanistan in early September. So that being said, our research and participation in this program allowed us to have an informed understanding of exactly how displacement can be a direct result of conflict and war-torn parts of the world. So again, so when all this was happening at the same time, it was also very interesting to speak with Tara, who is an alum dedicated to NGO work or non-governmental humanitarian work. And so we could then go a little deeper on this important global issue. And Jess.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Thompson, and I'm a senior at Sacred Heart Greenwich as well in the Global Scholars Program. I had the opportunity to participate in this phenomenal experience with Tara Hammonds earlier this year as part of our study of refugeeism and humanitarian efforts, which Megan just talked about. I would love to provide some background on Tara before we begin. So Tara was a member of Sacred Heart Greenwich's class of 2014 and was very involved in the Africa Task Force. She created programs to help build awareness about the issues that exist in Africa and the reasons those issues should be important to us here in the United States. She was also very interested in Catholic education, particularly the need to have Catholic schools available in various communities. She ran a fundraiser to keep her elementary school open when it was threatened with closing. Like me, Tara also loved taking French here at Sacred Heart Greenwich and enjoyed classes with one of my favorite teachers, Madame Josephson. After graduating, Tara got her BS and MPS from Cornell University in Global Development. Now, Tara is an international development professional currently working with Catholic Relief Services in Gaza, where she manages and supports programming in emergency response, livelihoods, economic development, and food security. Prior to joining CRS, Tara worked to support farmers' organizations across Uganda as a fellow with TechnoServe. Her international experience has also included work with the International Livestock Research Institute in Kenya to protect pastoralists from drought risk through livestock insurance, leading a team through Malawi to provide business consulting services to a woman-owned, socially driven agribusiness, supporting food security programming in Niger, and conducting a study of developments in central Madagascar's dairy industry. I hope you find our Zoom with Tara as informative and interesting as I did. Please enjoy.
Okay. Thank you so much to Jess and Megan. And at this point, we will now share with you the interview that the Global Scholars had with Tara Hammonds earlier this fall. And as we said earlier, it's global citizenship work that we did as a cohort, but just very briefly, I just wanted to give a little context on the topic, which Megan did so nicely, but just to give you a sense of, we did some reading and research over the summer. These were some of the articles that the girls read and reviewed, and we discussed along these specific strands that aligned with the book that the entire senior class read called The Girl Who Smiled Beads. So this was also a cross-curricular initiative, but here's how things kind of synthesized across different themes. And when we go through the Zoom, you'll see how we learn about Tara and her kind of career life and how her calling to work with Catholic Relief Services, and then a little bit more inquiry along the NGO space and the topics specifically of refugeeism, displaced people, and then Afghanistan. And then here, I just wanted to show you this slide. These are our 14 global scholars in all their glory. One of the things where I just want to say thank you to Tara is that she is currently living in Gaza, which is a big time difference. And one of the things we were able to do was have asynchronous engagement where students were able to ask her questions and she responded. And this really helped to kind of activate our conversation and made it very valuable. So with that, I now want to turn to our main event, and I will now get that video going so you can all see our students at work. Okay, let me think. Can you all see that screen?
I think you unshared your screen.
All right, hang on one second. Let me do that. Okay, quick technical reconfiguration. Okay, sharing screen. Okay, can we see that now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so with now we're going to have the Zoom, and at the end we'll come back for some Q&A and some wrap up. Okay, thanks so much.
Hi, Tara. I'm Claire. So looking at the mission of Catholic Relief Services as a primarily as cherishing, preserving, and upholding the sacredness and dignity of human life through fostering charity and justice. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to this humanitarian organization in particular? And do you find it especially beneficial or meaningful to carry out your work through a Catholic lens?
Hi, Claire. Thanks so much for the question. I'm glad that you looked into Catholic Relief Services a little bit and found this bit on its mission. And it was really exactly what you've put on this slide here that drew me to Catholic Relief Services. The idea that the whole organization, it's an organization of more than 6,000 people. And the whole organization is geared towards prioritizing human dignity and sort of the sacredness of human life throughout all the programming. And what you find sometimes in NGO work is, you have a lot of responsibility to different stakeholders, right? So we get money from donors, and you have to end up, reporting your results to donors. You have to be tracking what you're doing. And so in this type of work, it's a sort of easy to fall into the trap of people just becoming numbers, right? We're distributing food to 1,000 people. We have helped 500 people find jobs, right? But Catholic Relief Services really focuses, again, on the dignity and the people behind those numbers, right? So they're not just numbers, they're people, and that's something that we have to think about and engage in and do our programming in a way that really prioritizes that dignity. And a lot of organizations are trying more and more to do that, but Catholic Relief Services is just really wonderful at doing that and making sure that its programming is just very person-centric and human-centric. And it is focused, I know we'll get into some of this a little bit later, I saw in the questions, but its whole mission is focused on the Catholic social teaching. So we base a lot of our programming on principles of things like solidarity, which ties in really well to global citizenship, that, we want to be thinking about, the global community, right, as sort of a family, and but we have a responsibility to that family. And so the Catholic lens, again, really helps to put faces to these people, and to engage in very meaningful ways with these people and create very real relationships with these people, which I find really important in humanitarian and development work. So that is the biggest thing that makes me really appreciate working for Catholic Relief Services. Thanks so much again for the question, Claire.
Thank you.
Joel? Thank you. We're just trying to get our technical stuff done.
Hi, my name is Joy, and hello, my name is Joy, and I was wondering, where do you feel your work has been the most impactful to the community that you helped?
Hi, Joy. Nice to meet you. And thank you for the question. It is a very good question. And I guess I'll start by saying that I feel like this career and the placements that I've had through my career so far have probably impacted me more than I can say I've had an impact on the communities necessarily, because it's just really wonderful and meaningful work to engage in. But in terms of projects that I've worked on and communities that I've helped, that I've tried to help, I would say maybe actually being here in Gaza is one that I feel is one of the most impactful. And that's because Catholic Relief Services is one of the leading NGOs here in Gaza providing assistance. There are some other organizations as well, but we are one of the biggest, and it's a pretty small place. It's very small geographically, and there's only about 2 million people here. And so what we're able to do with our funding can make a little bit more of an impact than it can maybe in some much bigger countries, or some places where we don't have as big of a reach, or potentially as much funding. And so the size of the place and the size of our projects too, again, means that we can engage a little bit more meaningfully with people. So some of our projects, we're only working with maybe 40 or 50 beneficiaries, but then we can have, in-person sessions and trainings and be meeting these people and hearing their stories and engaging with them, and hopefully making a little bit more of an impact than we would be if we were trying to, reach a lot more people with limited funding. And so maybe just to tell you a little bit about what we do here, it's a lot of different things, but we, there's sort of sporadic conflict here and escalations. And so following escalations, we provide cash and voucher assistance to families to help them buy things that will help them recover from the escalations. We provide assistance for them to help them rebuild shelters if they've lost their homes. And we also provide trauma healing and what's called psychosocial support, especially to children and teens who may have been a little bit more affected emotionally and mentally by some of these escalations. And so it's very different from the work I've done anywhere else, but it feels very meaningful, and it feels like it is making a difference. I hope that answers your question, Joy. Thanks for the question.
It does. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Lucy Catalano, and the question that I wanted to ask is, how do you think that after going to Sacred Heart, and as they said in your introduction, being really involved in learning other languages, how do you think that helped shape your career and passions now?
Hi, Lucy. I love this question. Thank you so much. I love talking about how important languages are. I think that, well, I'll say a couple of things here. So at Sacred Heart, I took both French and Latin, both with Dr. Josephson, and she put a very which is prevalent. And so that was actually very, very meaningful for me in the sense that it helped me sort of put places and put cultures to the languages that I was learning, which again I feel like it helped me grow as a global citizen. And I think that I'm so glad that focusing on languages is such a big part of the Global Scholars Program, because it's so important, especially when you're considering even just traveling abroad, but certainly working internationally, because even just knowing a few words in another language is just a sign of humility and respect when you're entering another culture. And so, here in Gaza, all our work is in English, but the local language is Arabic, and most people speak Arabic. And I do not speak Arabic, but I've been trying to just learn some basic greetings and phrases and whatnot. And it's amazing how much people appreciate that. They know that you can't carry a conversation with them. But it's the fact that you try to learn this language that's important to them and try to engage in their culture and engage with them in a way that they're comfortable with can be very meaningful in terms of cultural exchange, in terms of building relationships internationally. And so I just think I just think it's so important to learn languages. It's so important to love languages. And again, I'm so excited that this is a focus of the Global Scholars Program, and that it sounds like all of you within this cohort are very passionate about languages and are engaging in language classes. I think that's really important and really special.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Lucy.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Catherine Devine. And my question is, what does the future for involvement of CRS in like Gaza and Jerusalem look like?
Hi, Catherine. That's a really good question. And the short answer is I don't know, but the long answer would be, so our programming here, from an administrative standpoint, we do have our central office in Jerusalem, but then most of our work is focused both in Gaza as well as in the West Bank. And I can see that you've done a little bit of research in those areas as well. And the reason for that is that's where the effects of this ongoing conflict are the most prevalent and are impacting people the most heavily. And so it's really interesting here in Gaza specifically because a lot of our funding comes from the US government, from USAID. And for about 2.5 years, starting at the end of 2019, all funding from the US government to Gaza was frozen because they were doing a very in-depth review to make sure that funding wasn't being diverted to terrorist organizations. So for several years here, we were still operating and had smaller projects, but we didn't have any large sources of funding really. And just back in June, they being USAID, started to release funding once again. And so just about 2 weeks ago, maybe, we got another $5 million from USAID, and we got another letter of intent that they're planning to give us more funding to work with local organizations, so Gaza-based and West Bank-based organizations that are doing similar work to us, but that are registered here. And so people here always say that our programming is very dependent on what funding is available. And people here always say that funding in the Holy Land, in Gaza and the West Bank, is either feast or famine. It's either sort of difficult to find, or you have a ton of it all at once. And right now we're in one of those feast modes where we have a lot of funding coming in. So it's really exciting when we think about the future of CRS in this area, because we have so much funding coming in and so much trust from our donors as well. That we're able to really engage in a lot of different ways. So again, in the types of programming I was mentioning before, where we distribute cash and vouchers, where we do trauma healing and psychosocial support, but then also engaging in these new types of projects as well, which is very exciting to us. So there's a lot going on, and again, at most NGOs, we do have like individual donations that fund some of our projects as well. So I'm sure you'll see if you ever go on the CRS website, there's always a button that says donate. And so we do get funding from there as well. But our big sources of funding are generally from various governments. And so when governments have funding available, it's very positive for us. So we're in one of those positive eras right now. So it's a very exciting time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine.
Hi, my name is Charlotte. It's so nice to talk to you today and to hear that you're still working with a Catholic organization after Sacred Heart. So my question is, what is an example of a project that you've worked on that's most memorable to you?
Hi, Charlotte. Good to meet you. That is a good question. Maybe I'll give you 2 examples. The first is a project I was working on last year when I was based in Niger with Catholic Relief Services, and we were doing a very large food security project. So a lot of different interventions in very food insecure areas. And I was new to Catholic Relief Services at that point, and I also felt I was sort of new to the NGO sphere as a whole at that point as well. And about a month after I joined, they asked me to take over, similarly to what we do here, another voucher distribution program. So we were trying to distribute vouchers to families that they could then exchange at local shops for basic food items. And it was a very large scale project. And I think it's memorable to me because it made me realize how much I didn't know and how much I still had to learn. And it's something that I keep realizing that it's one of the things that's so exciting about working in the humanitarian and development spheres, that you just never stop learning, and you're always sort of humbled by the experience and the knowledge of the people around you. It's really a humbling thing, and it creates a culture where you just continuously learn from other people and from your context. And this project in particular was sort of a big wake-up call for me to help me realize that. Another one that was very memorable to me was this was about 3 years ago. I was in Malawi for a couple of weeks working with a Malawian woman. She was a small business owner, and she had a social enterprise where she was focused on producing food made out of orange flesh sweet potato, which is higher in vitamin A. And so she was doing that to try to combat malnutrition in Malawi. And so I was with a small team that was working with her to strengthen her business, basically to help her build a business plan and a production plan and whatnot. And that was a really memorable experience, both because she was just such a wonderful woman to work with and just had, a real love for her community that she was working towards. So even though we were only working with one person, it was just a really, really inspiring person who was doing really inspiring work. And it's also really interesting to engage in the private sector. So when you have entrepreneurs like this woman who are committed to a social cause, but are also starting a business that will make money and potentially be more sustainable, that can be a really interesting solution to some of these longer term challenges. So that was a very memorable one as well. And it's hard to select just one or two because they've all been very memorable in very different ways. But yeah, great question, Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, Tara. Thank you so much. I was just curious if I could ask, how do you find that your work internationally and your global perspective impacts your view of domestic affairs and American politics?
That's an awesome question. I think one of the biggest things is being exposed to a lot of international issues. It's made me want to become a little bit more engaged in advocacy in the U.S. So there are different alerts that you can get from various organizations and people that will notify you when certain bills are being sent through Congress, and a surprising number of them have to do with either international funding or other issues that I've been engaging with internationally. It might be certain types of social services, but I would say being exposed to some of these issues internationally has made me want to be more tuned in to what is happening within our own government and our own legislative branch, and to try to engage a little bit more with my representatives to try to make sure that we are getting funding internationally from the US and that funding is being allocated to causes that I care very deeply for. And I guess I'm not coming up with any specific examples right now, but seeing how other countries approach certain things can also help to give interesting perspective on how the US does certain things. And one of those actually is hosting refugees, which I know we have plenty of questions for later. But I spent time in Uganda, for example, and they're one of the countries that hosts the most refugees in the world. I think maybe the most in Africa, and seeing what their system was for welcoming refugees and how they hosted them and tried to promote social cohesion with those refugees is very different from how the U.S. does it, I think, and not necessarily that one is better than the other, but it just does give you some interesting perspective on what's being done in the U.S. as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Hey Tara, I'm Kayla, and it's so great to meet you, and thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I just wanted to ask you, given that there are, like the slide says, 82.4 million forcibly displaced persons around the globe, how you've maintained your faith, how you've maintained your faith just in your work after seeing and hearing about so many sad stories.
Hey, Kayla. Yeah, that's a really important question, and I'm really glad you asked it. I think for the bulk of my experience, it's actually been the opposite, which may sound strange, but I think that, in this type of work you see a lot of sadness and a lot of suffering, and a lot of people who are really struggling. But you also see really strong relationships and really strong senses of community among some of these people. And, you'll see a whole community where everyone is in the same situation and they really work together to help bring themselves out of that situation. You see people, I would say almost everywhere I've been, there have been people who are just in very difficult situations, and they'll still go out of their way to make sure that I feel welcome. They'll take me into their home and share a meal with me and show me just incredible kindness. And I think that, that's for a very long time, that's been the most powerful way that I've seen God is through the actions of other people. And so I think that even in the context of all of this difficulty and all of this suffering, just the way people act and the kindness and the love that people show in these situations, regardless of what they're going through, is so powerful and is just really a testament to God being in these situations. And so, as strange as it may seem, it's actually I would say being in this line of work has really helped me to grow my faith. By seeing the love that people show for each other, the love that people show towards me within these situations. So yeah, Kayla, that's such a good question. I'm really glad you asked it.
Well, I'm going to present the next slide as well. She unfortunately couldn't be here, but this is Megan's slide. And she wanted to ask you how and do you see the goals and criteria of Sacred Heart in your humanitarian work?
It's another great question. I think the most obvious one is, right, we have the goal around a social awareness, which compels to action. And that's definitely been a big driver in my work so far and in my early career. I think being in this line of work makes you really want to learn more about these issues, as you are all doing very, very effectively with this issue of refugeeism. It almost makes you feel a responsibility to learn more about these issues and about these drivers and of course about these people. And then the more you learn, the more you feel impelled to action, right? The more it sort of compels you to try to work on these issues and try to think through these challenges. So that has probably been the most powerful one for my career. But I'd be curious, I guess, from your end, Kayla, and anyone else in the room as well, how do you see the goals and criteria fitting into humanitarian work, and which do you feel is, I guess, when you have been doing this research around refugeeism, maybe what has been the goal that has been sort of encouraging you to engage in this type of research, to engage in the Global Scholars Program?
Well, for me personally, I would say it's a mix of goal 2, 3, and 4. Goal 3, because of the reason that you just said, just learning about these issues so that we can kind of bring it out into the world and do something about it. Goal 2, because I feel like it takes a lot of dedication to be able to research these topics, especially because they're difficult to learn about and difficult to really absorb. And goal 4, going back to your answer to my question, only because, like you were saying, like you've met so many people that have welcomed you into your home and have just treated you with such kindness. And I think that being open to that and being willing to like go into people's homes or bring people into your home is such I cannot speak, an important factor of the work that you do, and just being a more, I guess, global citizen. And yeah, so
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. That's awesome. Thank you, Kayla.
Hi, I'm Diana, and for my question, I was wondering if you could talk about some of the differences and similarities between the experience of being a refugee and an internally displaced person, and also how they differ in getting access to resources.
Hi, Diana. Yeah, that's a really good question as well. And I will put a disclaimer in here that I have not done too much work with refugees specifically, so do take what I say with a grain of salt. But I think, you know, thinking about refugees versus internally displaced people, they do end up facing a lot of the same issues. So I know, you know, in some of your videos you were talking about, it might have even been yours, Diana, I forget, but someone was talking about barriers to education. And I know someone was talking as well about access to information. And so a lot of those types of challenges, refugees and internally displaced people do experience very similarly. One of the big differences is that, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about my experience with internally displaced people in Niger. So there's a region of West Africa that's sort of, it's called I guess the tri-border region. So it's sort of the region around the borders of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And there are several extremist groups, violent extremist groups that are very, very active in that region. And so for that reason, there ends up being a lot of internal displacement, both within the countries themselves, but even across the borders a little bit, but they are still considered internally displaced people. And so their experience ends up being, you know, they don't necessarily have the information or the resources to relocate to another country. So they're generally relocating to other communities within that same region, but they're still very affected by what displaced them in the first place, right? So a family displaced by violence in one town might still be subject to that violence in the town that they displaced to. So it can be a really challenging situation for internally displaced people, and very often it can be a little bit more difficult to reach with humanitarian assistance. So again, we did have some programming in that region trying to offer support and social cohesion services to internally displaced people there. But because of the violent situation there, what we were able to do in person was very limited. Our movements in that region were very limited from a security standpoint. And so it does make getting support and aid to internally displaced people a little bit more difficult. But then it's just a very different experience, right? So, you know, refugees, you're relocating to another country, but then as someone highlighted, I think in one of their videos, you're not in your home, right? You're in a strange country, and, you know, actually getting to another country is just the start. You know, it doesn't mean that your life there will be easy. It doesn't mean that you'll be able to easily assimilate. It doesn't mean you'll be able to easily reclaim what you left behind and start a new living. So they end up having very different experiences, but the challenges that they face end up being very similar. And again, both are in very very difficult and very challenging situations, and situations where aid can be very difficult. So again, so some differences, but similar. And I think probably the biggest similarity, right, is that they were removed from their home, and that's a really serious and a really difficult thing to go through, whether you're just moving to a nearby community or whether you're moving to a different country. Just the act of not being able to live in a place that you call home can be a really difficult thing. I'm looking at your follow-up question. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I know there's not a great answer to it, but I hope that helps to give a little bit of context about the differences and similarities.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana.
Hi, Tara. I'm Claire, and I've loved hearing about your work so far. What I was wondering is, do you foresee certain countries as being more impacted by refugeeism than others in the future?
Hi, Claire. That's a great question. And so I'm curious, are you more interested in it from like trying to think about countries that might produce more refugees, or countries that might end up having to host more refugees?
Yeah, I think I was thinking in terms of countries that will produce more refugees.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I am not, certainly nowhere near an expert in the area of refugeeism. But I think, any country that that is impacted by violence, whether it's a violent government or whether it's violent extremist groups, or both, sort of as we're seeing in the case of Afghanistan, I think has the potential to produce a lot more refugees. Yeah, and I don't want to say like a specific country because I don't have enough information to say that necessarily, but I think there's certainly a lot, and much more than we realize. And I would say on the flip side of it too, there are countries that are being pretty significantly impacted by hosting refugees, and that can be both positive and negative, actually. And again, going back to Uganda, they host so many refugees, and so it sort of shapes. Like there's a very large refugee camp in northern Uganda, and it sort of almost defines the culture of northern Uganda. It ends up having a very significant impact on what the country is like. So there are countries like that too that are impacted very significantly by hosting refugees. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Again, I'm learning just as much as you are, probably just from seeing your videos and hearing about what you've been reading. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about what you think.
Yeah, I agree with you that countries who are faced with more like cultural conflicts and religious conflicts will probably produce more refugees, because there's a lot of like cultural conflicts, and I think when there's so many clashes based off of that, it leads to a lot of turmoil, and I think that would help contribute to the refugeeism problem. But I think it's also interesting to consider it from the standpoint of what countries will have to bear the responsibility of hosting those refugees, because that's a problem that we see a lot right now with Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Claire.
Hi, Tara. It's been so great hearing from you so far. My name's Leah, and I think going off of what Claire just said, she mentioned Afghanistan briefly, and I know that's something that's in the news a lot recently. So specifically as teenagers, and with social media being such a large thing right now, I was wondering, which media outlets do you trust for reliable news, specifically about the volatile and high conflict zones like Afghanistan?
Yeah, hi Leah. Yeah, that's a really important question. One of my go-to sources for information is The Economist, to sort of get up-to-date information about global affairs. I have found it to be pretty unbiased in my experience, and also very accessible. There's even a little app. I have it on my phone. It's called Economist Espresso. And every day it just sends you like 5 or 6 very brief news stories about what's happening around the world. And there may be 1 or 2 paragraphs each. They're very short. So it's something you can just look through quickly, you know, when you're on the bus on the way to school, or, you know, waiting in the common room for first period or something. It makes information really accessible, and it's very timely. And like I said, I found it to be relatively unbiased as well. There's certainly other ones out there, but I would say too that don't shy away from reading or from reading biased news stories, but just do be aware of the bias, because especially with something like Afghanistan, you can actually learn a lot about the people who disagree with you by learning, you know, what media they're reading, and that can then help to inform your argument. So in the case of Afghanistan, for example, my opinion of what we should have been doing was very different from a close friend of mine, for example. And so he was sending me certain articles, and I was sending him back certain articles, and we were realizing that both were omitting pretty crucial information in favor of one side or the other. But it was really helpful for me to understand what people who disagreed with me were reading, so that I could both inform myself and also inform my argument a little bit better, and be able to speak a little bit more holistically about the subject. So I would say, yeah, so my basic answer is I love The Economist. I think it's great, but don't shy away from reading things that you disagree with. Just do be aware of what biases are there in some of those news sources.
Thank you.
Do you have a preference, Leah? Do you have a sort of go-to that you go to for information?
Similar to what you were saying, I know the New York Times has their daily briefing, which I like to read like in the morning. It has kind of every day something small and easily consumable on my right to school in the morning.
Great, that's awesome.
Okay, I think we're gonna leave it there for now and open it up. We want to make sure we have some time for some Q&A. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, great. I think everyone will agree that Tara is just a wonderful, remarkable alum, and this has been such an engaging conversation, and it's great for me to be able to see it again. But right now, I thought we would try to look in the chat. I know that a few questions have come in, and so I was going to ask Megan Ryan if maybe you wanted to kind of read a question or two so that we could have give Megan and Jess a chance to answer some questions on the experience.
Sure. So we had a comment also. So I'll read the comment and then I'll get to the questions. So this comment is from a class of 2020 global scholar who also took French and Latin. She said that she especially relates to Tara's point on deeper understanding through language, the connotations, the history, the culture, the community. Not knowing the languages creates several levels of disconnection, and she appreciates her taking the time to emphasize that as well. I don't know if anyone had a comment to that or if you want me to move on.
Yeah, I mean, at Sacred Heart, I take French and Chinese, so I also kind of do the double language. And I was actually born in Germany, so I have this kind of global perspective. And I found that when I travel and when I'm in Germany, it's so much more difficult to feel part of my culture when I can't communicate with them. And that's why, I mean, I started learning German as well. But what I love so much about the Sacred Heart perspective on language is that we tied into all facets of our education. So we learn about languages and history and in senior seminar that we're taking right now. And so I love the Sacred Heart education in that it's so cohesive and we use our languages and other facets of our education here as well.
Thank you. And then this question is for Ms. Cinto. You mentioned that the Global Scholars Program has 3 pillars. How do you see the pillars reflected in tonight's presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were all represented so well. And I just loved at the end, I mean, when we think about language, obviously, so the pillars being, you know, language proficiency, global studies, and citizenship, we've just covered language, right? And Tara couldn't have been more of a commercial. And then the comments just made by Megan and Jess, like, you know, language is critical to understanding other people and having a different perspective and having an ear for an alternative point of view. So I love that. In terms of studies, I mean, just some of the thought, just learning about refugeeism, I think talking about politics and bias and how being outside of the United States, where does she get her news from? The Economist Expresso, actually, we took her up on that suggestion. So now our librarian, Angela Carstensen, sends us the Economist Expresso to the Global Scholars every day. So that's a cool thing and a great takeaway. And then in terms of citizenship, I just think Tara exemplifies that, right? I mean, she herself is inspirational, just seeing what she does. And she truly does aspire to doing more with Catholic relief services and that notion of dignity and helping others. So really tonight, our goal with the program and citizenship is this do, create, and share, and being able to share this idea, shining a light on what she does. I think that's the goal. That's what we're trying to do.
Great. So girls, this one's for you. How did speaking to Tara help you understand the ways in which academic coursework and language study can intersect in the real world? I think Jess, you might have spoken a little bit about that just earlier, but
I can talk too.
Okay.
So I think, well, definitely speaking to Tara demonstrates the way in which our education can translate directly into looking to the world with a global perspective. So like for me, for example, kind of the first major part in my experience at Sacred Heart where I was introduced to global scholars was actually before the program. It was in my AP Spanish language and culture class, and we had a unit on global citizenship. It was integrated right into one of our classes where we were taught, so we were learning the language, but not only were we learning the language, but we were learning about the different cultures where our language exists. So I think that's really powerful because it was kind of a wake-up call for me, to be completely honest, to sort of start looking outside of Sacred Heart, to look at the world, at our country, and to sort of to put into practice the methods of thinking that I'd been learning throughout my entire time here, but to put it into a global lens. How is what we do, how are our actions here, how are our actions as a country on the global spectrum, how does it affect everything around us and the people that live here? So I think seeing Tara, at least, it definitely for me it was very empowering to see that she was coming from the same educational background as me, and now I have been introduced to this topic and this realm of thinking and education, and I think for me at least, it is definitely something that I know that I want to pursue, and seeing Tara, it just really emphasizes how possible it is.
I think we have time for one more. Otherwise, I think we may want to be mindful of the clock and wrapping up on time. What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, sure. We can do one more. Let's see. How about this one? Were you familiar with the NGO humanitarian space before this experience?
I can answer that one. So I personally was not familiar with the NGO humanitarian space before this experience. And I think that's part of the reason it was so amazing and why this Zoom resonated so much with me, because Tara had so much to say with it. And a bit similar to Megan is the way that she intertwined her experience after graduating with her Sacred Heart education was just incredible. And it kind of showed what we can do now as global scholars and all the students at Sacred Heart to use our own education to go further into the NGO and humanitarian kind of subject when we graduate.
And I think maybe adding on to Jess too, I mentioned before that like taking my Spanish class was a wake-up call almost. I think that speaking with Tara and being in Global Scholars, it also does that, but not in a bad way, and actually in a really enriching way, where every time we talk and we meet and we learn about people like Tara, it's us learning that we do not know everything and that we can continue to learn and interact as global citizens. So it's very important for us, and it's really great that we have an alum to look up to.
Yeah. And I think that might be a very nice closing thought, which is the idea that now, like in the third year of this program, that's really the takeaway, right? Because we're trying to develop global leaders as a school. And for young women, it's so important to have a sense of network, right? To have role models, to have people like Tara who are out there, who are alums, who are paving the way. And she's given of herself, and she's shared her email. She wants to continue the dialogue with our students and with our school, and that is so powerful. And that's what we want to do. So I think that's exciting to get that going and to have that mindset and to know that there's a network out there, supporting one another. But I think at this point, that sort of concludes our webinar for the evening. And we again want to thank all of you for joining us. I think this has been has gone incredibly well. I thank our two students here, Megan Maloney and Jess Thompson. You guys were terrific. And the rest of our Global Scholars cohort, who of course, were involved with all the legwork to do our cohort work and interviewing Tara. And of course, the great Tara Hammonds. And I know her family is in the area, and I hope they're able to see this. And we couldn't be more grateful. So we'll be in touch with her again soon. But thanks to everyone. We appreciate your participation and involvement. And hopefully we'll do another one again soon. Okay. Thanks to everyone. Have a great night.